Hello. Well, I'm Dr. Hemant and I welcome everybody to the bookworm meeting. And I'm going to review the book The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins. I'll start my presentation, and first I would share my screen. So the book that I'm going to review today is by Richard Dawkins, The God Delusion, and it has got 464 pages. It was published in 2006 October and was published by Bantam Books. Now, something about the author. Richard Dawkins is a British revolutionary biologist and author. He's an emeritus fellow of New College, Oxford, and was professor for public understanding of science in the University of Oxford from 1995 to 2008. He's an atheist, and actually he's a well-known atheist, as ways to say, because you find a lot of debates on YouTube and all other places. And he's well known for his criticism for creationism and intelligent design. Dawkins was it first came into prominence with his path-breaking 1976 book, The Selfish Genes. Well, I have read that book, and I would definitely recommend everybody to read that book because it was something which has come up with a very mind-opening arguments and details. And his other books also are pretty good. The Magic Reality, The Blind Watchmaker, The Extended Phenotype, and Unweaving the Rainbow. So he's very well known, and it would be interesting to see what exactly he's going to talk about, what he calls it as the God delusion in the book. So before I start, let me just tell you that this is my disclaimer. I am neither an atheist nor an agnostic. Actually, I am a curious reader and who definitely wants to give respect to every opinion. And before we start, I always love to look at the preface. And, if you talk about the preamble, because if you look at this, then this definitely would let you know that what kind of argument and what kind of things are going to come up in the book for us to consider. So, he says in the preamble that religion has certain ideas at the heart of it, which we call sacred or holy or whatever. What it means is that here is an idea or a notion that you're not allowed to say something bad about. You're just not. Why not? Because you just cannot. And it is in the light of this unparalleled presumption of respect for religion that I make my own disclaimer for this book. I shall not go out of my way to offend, but nor shall I don kid gloves to handle the religion any more gently than I would handle anything else. So this is one thing is very clear about before we start reading the book about his handling of the religion. He goes on to say that I'm not attacking any particular version of God or gods. I'm attacking God, all gods, anything and everything supernatural, wherever and whenever they have been or will be invented. There is no position on which people are so immovable as the religious beliefs. There is no more powerful ally one can claim in a debate than Jesus Christ or God or Allah or whatever one calls the supreme being. And this has been his stance at many places, that you find that it is, you just can't talk about God, you can't argue against God, you cannot give certain questions of existence of God, and that is what it is prevailing right now. So unless otherwise stated, now this is what his point is, that I shall have Christianity mostly in mind, but only because it is the version with which I happen to be most familiar. But otherwise, he says that wherever the God which is considered as a supernatural, or the omniscient and omnipotent, he definitely does not believe in that. So, in fact, he starts his book with what he call it as Einstein religion, and all of us know that the Einstein was very famous as far as his belief in God was concerned. And in fact, he actually has said something which is very interesting, which Einstein said that I am a deeply religious non-believer. Now, this is something which is very interesting thing. And when he says that deeply religious non-believer, what actually he says is this: that I don't try to imagine a personal God. I prefer not to call myself religious because it is misleading. It is destructively misleading because for the vast majority of people, religions implies supernatural. So Einstein, though, believes that, he kind of deeply religious in other forms, but he said that there is nothing supernatural. And all of us know that how Einstein was severely criticized, that he was against God. But that's a different story. Now, the author says that he still does not believe in even this Einstein religion. He's out and out atheist, and he says that the God does not exist for sure. So I've picked up, important things from the book and tried to maintain the flow so that the continuity of thought process stays, and I can at least do justice to what author is trying to say. And at the end of the review, I shall come up with my own take on the book. So first, he talks about what he calls as a God hypothesis. Now, under that, before that, I really want you to go through this because this is a very important point that he has raised. Is kind of a spectrum of believers, and this spectrum is right from the pure theist to pure atheist. And actually, I would suggest that if you, when we go through the spectrum, just think, where do you believe, which spectrum you are on, and that would definitely be interesting because as you go along, you would be able to understand the book or object to the book, whatever you feel it is right, and depending upon what the spectrum of believers you belong to. The first one is the pure theist, is I do not believe because I know there is God. Then the next one is I cannot know for certain, but I strongly believe in God and I live my life on the assumption that He is there. Still down, I'm very uncertain, but I'm inclined to believe in God, almost getting towards the agnosticism. And God's existence and non existence are exactly equiprobable. Then going towards the atheist side is I don't know whether God exists, but I'm inclined to be skeptical. I cannot know for certain, but I think God is very improbable, and I live my life on the assumption that He is not there. And I know there is no God. That is a strong atheist. So you can see from the strong theist to strong atheist belief, there's a spectrum. So wherever you belong, these are and you find plenty of people, going in between this, from strong theist to strong atheist. And that's why this book also makes it a very interesting reading. He actually comes up with it's a great prayer experiment. Now, what happened was that Dr. Benson and his team, they monitored about 1,800 patients at 6 hospitals, all of whom received coronary bypass surgery. The patients were divided into 3 groups. The group 1 received prayers and they did not know it. Group 2, the control group, received no prayers and did not know it. And the group 3 received prayers and did know it. So that means group 3 knew that they were being prayed for. So if you look at the comparison between group 1 and group 2, tests for the efficacy of intercessory prayer, whether what exactly is the effect. And group 3 would test for the possible psychosomatic effects of knowing that one is being prayed for, because this was the group who knew that they are being prayed for. Now, prayers were delivered by the congregations of 3 churches, all distant from these 3 hospitals, and the praying individuals, as explained, were given only the first name and the initial letter of the surname of each patient for whom they were to pray. Now, what were the results? The results were reported in American Heart Journal of April 2006, and they were clear cut. There was no difference between those patients who were prayed and those who were not. And those who knew they had been the beneficiaries of prayer suffered significantly more complications than those who did not. Surprised? And so he actually says that this result obviously was not going to be accepted by all the religious people of the world. And that's why the Oxford theologian, the Richard Swinburne, is pretty well known. He actually wrote after the study failed, and he said that God answers prayer only if they are offered up for a good reason. And the second argument was that good God regrets our sufferings, but his greatest concern is surely that each of us shall show the patience, sympathy, and generosity, and thereby form a holy character. He actually goes on and for a couple of pages ridicules these arguments and says that how you cannot talk against God. Now, the God hypothesis suggests that reality we inhabit also contains a supernatural agent, the omnipotent, omniscient, who designed and created the universe and everything in it, including us. The existence of God is a scientific hypothesis like any other. Nobody thinks the hypothesis of their existence is on even footing with the hypothesis of their non existence. So, this is what his argument is. And he says that I advocate an alternative view in this book. Any creative intelligence of sufficient complexity to design anything comes into existence only as the end product of an extended process of gradual evolution. And he says that God is a pernicious illusion. It's not just illusion, it's a pernicious illusion. And so, what are the arguments for God existence that he says that we find? And, there must have been a time when no physical things existed. But since all the things exist now, all the physical things exist now, there must have been something non physical to bring them into existence. And that's something we call God. Things in the world, especially living things, look as though they have been designed. There must have been a designer, because without designer there cannot be a design. A beautiful food, a beautiful flower, a beautiful all the kinds of beauties that you see in the nature, a beautiful tree, beautiful mountain, beautiful clouds, and beautiful butterfly, beautiful birds. All these things are very beautiful human body, and but this cannot be designed unless there is a designer, and we call that designer a god. A plane crashed, killing 143 passengers and a crew, but one child survived with only one third degree burns, and therefore God exists. I believe in God. I do believe in God. Well, I do believe in God, and therefore the God exists. God loves you. How could you be so heartless as not to believe in Him? Therefore, God exists. Many people believe in God because they believe they have seen a vision of Him. And many believe God exists as it is mentioned in the Holy Scriptures. And in fact, this is one of the very common thing. I'm sure everyone would definitely be here on the same page that people's belief in God is because they believe in the Holy Scriptures with which they have grown up, whether it is a Bible, whether it is Quran or any other religious book that they have been brought up with, and that's why they feel that God exists because the scriptures have already mentioned that. So these are several reasons by which, because of which the people argue in favor of God. And his counterpoints are the fact that something is written down in the is persuasive to people not used to asking questions like who wrote it and when. For example, nobody says that who wrote Bible and when, how much time did it take, how did they know what to write, did they in their time really mean what we in our time understand them to be saying. The only difference between Da Vinci Code and Gospels is that the Gospels are ancient fiction, while Da Vinci Code is a modern fiction. Aren't you reminded of Yuval Harari, who says that he actually compared this to Harry Potter, the scriptures? And so he totally does not believe. His argument is that all the scriptures were not written over time, they were written over centuries, and they were written by people who did not even know each other. And that's why they were, edited and counter edited. And, that's why he said that this is only written by human beings. And how do you believe that these scriptures are correct? So that's his counterpoint. And he comes up with a very profound statement, and he says that burden of proof rests with the believers and not the non-believers. So it is other way around, that non-believers have to prove that there is no God, but the believers are not required to prove that there is God. So he says that why there is almost certainly no God. Now, what he has to say? The greatest challenge to the human intellect over the centuries has been to explain how the complex, improbable appearance of design in the universe arises. The natural temptation is to attribute the appearance of design to actual design itself. The temptation is a false one because the designer hypothesis immediately raises the larger problem that who designed the designer? Illusion of design is a trap. Who designed the designer? Is a central question. And the God capable of designing a universe or anything else would have to be complex. Now, this is one thing he keeps on repeating at several places in the book, that the God have to be complex, and that's why he says that it is statistically improbable. He gives a lot of arguments in favor of that. The argument from the improbability states that complex things could not have come by chance. So this is his one of the important arguments which says that why God does not exist, that God has to be something which has come up with such a large design. So many things have to be complex, and complex is never statistically probable. So that's the point that he actually has to go and say that why God does not exist. Now, the next one, he says that to suggest that the first cause, the great unknown, which is responsible something existing rather than nothing. I'll pause here and I'll say that if you read several, theologies, and you'll find that people always say that why there is something then nothing. So his argument is to this particular statement, you will find at several places that the great unknown, which is responsible for something existing rather than nothing, is being capable of designing the universe, of talking to a million people simultaneously, is a total abdication of the responsibility to find an explanation. It is a dreadful exhibition of self indulgent, thought denying skyhookery. Harsh words, but this is what he believes. And it turns out to be that God hypothesis that tries to get something for nothing. So he's not really convinced by any God hypothesis that we discussed. And I think just like all the scientists, especially those atheists, he is also one who believes in Darwin's natural selection. In fact, he has devoted several pages on Darwin's natural selection, trying to argue out everything that exists in the world is can be explained by Darwin's natural selection. I will not go into the too much of intricacies, but I'll definitely have picked up very important points which I think are relevant and should be passed on to you. Those who are interested, they can always read the book and go for the further finer argument that he has come up with. Darwin's natural selection. Now, this is his central statement. Darwin's natural selection is the only known solution to the otherwise unanswerable riddle of where the information comes from, and creationist logic is always the same. It is impossible to exaggerate the magnitude of problem that Darwin and Wallace solved. I could mention the anatomy, cellular structure, biochemistry, and behavior of literally any living organism by example. So he says that the Darwin selection theory can be applied to anything, right from the beauty of a flower to the behavior of a person. Everywhere he says it is the Darwin selection theory which is working. And what Darwin explained, natural selection is a daily and hourly scrutinizing throughout the world, every variation, even the slightest, rejecting that which is bad, preserving and adding up all that is good, silently and insensibly working whenever and wherever opportunity offers at the improvement of each organic being. For example, he gives some many examples, and he says that some of the things which were not needed or not required over the time actually it disappeared, and that was the Darwin's natural selection theory. And it definitely is not just for evolution, but it also the evolution theory even is right now also applying to all of us at the moment. Natural selection not only explains the whole life, it also raises our consciousness to power of science to explain how organized complexity can emerge from a simple beginnings without any deliberate guidance. So this is one of the most important thing. If you, in his preface, he says that one of the important objective of this book is to raise the reader's consciousness to the power of science, and that's one of the thing which he has been arguing at several places. For example, he gives an example that predators seems beautifully designed to catch prey animals. But while the prey animals seem equally beautifully designed to escape them, whose side is God on? And how did human life start? All of everybody still is asking this question today. Several things have come up, and what the science says is that origin of life was chemical event or series of events, whereby the vital conditions for natural selection first came about. The major ingredient was heredity, either DNA or more probably something that copies like DNA but less accurately, perhaps the related molecule RNA. Once the vital ingredient, some kind of genetic molecule, is in place, true Darwinian natural selection can follow and complex life emerges as eventual. I want your attention to be drawn to one particular statement which I would pick up at the end when I'll give you my review, and that's why I really want to reiterate here. What he says that once the vital ingredient, some kind of genetic molecular is in place, then the selection can follow. That means for Darwinian natural selection to follow, something had to exist. So this is one thing which we have to read between the lines. And he says that there are always, the gaps which are existing, gaps of knowledge, what he says. And in fact, we worship. His argument is that if you look at all the creationists, they only eagerly seek a gap in the present day knowledge or understanding. And if an apparent gap is found, it assumes that God by default must fill it. So whatever you can't explain, that we call is a gap, is always the that explains God. That's what exactly he's trying to say, and that's what the theologians or the people who are the believers, they always come up with those kind of arguments. So what worries the thoughtful theologians is that the gaps shrink as science advances, and God is threatened with eventually having nothing to do. He goes on to give examples of how once we thought that the world was flat, and at that time nobody could even think that the world can be round. Or that was a big gap at that time of believing that the world is flat. But then over the time, we now laugh it out that how can somebody think that the world was flat? Similarly, also, I actually quote somebody in, I think 400 years back that, nobody can even study anything outside this planet because it is impossible. And you know how our science has advanced. So he says that all these gaps which are there are actually gradually filled in by scientific knowledge. So whatever gap you find today, and if you think that it is not going to be filled in future, is not the right kind of thinking. And thinking that all the gaps are there because of the presence of God is also something which he does not approve of. So what worries scientists is something else. The theologians, he says that they feel because once the gaps shrink, the science would emerge. But what worries scientists is something else. It is an essential part of the scientific enterprise to admit ignorance, even to exult in ignorance as a challenge to future conquest. And he says that ignorance has been the stepping stone. If the scientists feel that they don't know, they in fact are challenged. They are actually motivated to find something which is not possible for them to understand. And that is why the science is progressing. And this science is striding. The physicist is calculated. Now there are several pages which some easy to understand, some difficult to understand because of there is a lot of scientific element into it, the physics element into it. But the simple thing which I can put forth here is that physicists have calculated. Now it's a very interesting statement that if the laws and constants of physics had been even slightly different, the universe would have developed in such a way that the life would have been impossible. So this is one thing he's trying to say, that this is what the science has even gone to this extent. And then some of you might be aware about the Martin Rees six numbers. Actually, Martin Rees came up with the six fundamental constants, which are believed to hold all around the universe. Each of these six numbers is finely tuned to the sense that if it were slightly different, the universe would be comprehensively different and presumably unfriendly to life. There is one number called E, which is 0.0006. And he says that if this number was even 0.007, then this world would not have been existing and not friendly to live. So this is what the science has actually advanced into. And perhaps there are some genuinely profound and meaningful questions that are beyond the reach of science, and that's what he admits. Maybe the quantum theory is already knocking on the door of unfathomable, and we know that how the quantum theory has been, making a lot of sense and the progress. But if science cannot answer some ultimate question, what makes anybody think that religion can? Bit arrogant, but this is the question that he is put forth. Then he goes on to talk a lot about religion, and mainly, as he has already mentioned in the beginning, that most of the things that he talks about is about the Christianity, a little bit about Judaism, and a little bit about Islam, and hardly anything about Hinduism. Uh, Before I start, actually, I want a couple of things to be told here that, as far as the Hinduism is concerned, he has made a couple of mentions at 4 or 5 places, and I think I can discuss that. One thing, he has already accepted that Hinduism is not a religion, but a philosophy to live, the way to live. That's one thing he says. He also actually applauds Mahatma Gandhi before the point that he said that Mahatma Gandhi said that I am a Christian, I am a Hindu, I am a Muslim, I am a Judaist, I am a Islam, I'm a Sikh, I'm a Jain. So he's the person who was really secular, and that's what he says that he was really appreciative of that. And then he also said that multiple gods in Hinduism not necessarily means that it is a polytheism. Actually, he also has understood that ultimately there is a monotheism in Hinduism, if at all, and all these gods are nothing but the way to reach to that ultimate God. So these are the three things which he has mentioned. Otherwise, nothing beyond that. And so going back to his arguments, 80 evolutionary psychologists suggest that just as the eye is an evolved organ for seeing, the wing is an evolved organ for flying, so the brain is a collection of organs or molecules for dealing with a set of specialist data processing needs. There is a molecule for dealing with the kinship, a module for dealing with the reciprocal exchanges, a module for the dealing with empathy, and so on. So religion can be seen, according to him, as a byproduct of the misfiring of several of these modules. For example, the modules for forming the theories of other minds, for forming coalitions, and for discriminating in favor of in-group members and against strangers. So thinking that what my religion think is right and what your religion think is wrong is the kind of a different kind of modules, and religion is a byproduct of misfiring of these modules. That's what he argues. And he says that I surmise that religions, like languages, evolve with sufficient randomness. In the beginning, there are sufficiently arbitraries to generate the bewildering and sometimes dangerous richness of diversity that we observe. At the same time, it is possible that a form of natural selection, coupled with the fundamental uniformity of human psychology, sees to it that the diverse religions share significant features in common. The idea of immortality itself survives and spreads because it caters to wishful thinking. And wishful thinking counts because human psychology has a near universal tendency to let belief be colored by desire. And he comes up with some, very famous quotable quotes. The reason is the greatest enemy that the faith has, with the Martin Luther King. And, this is what the Oscar Wilde says: the truth in the matters of religion is simply the opinion that has survived. Religion is regarded by the common people as true, wise as false, and by rulers as useful. And the religion is excellent stuff for keeping common people quiet, by Napoleon. I think, as far as the religion part is concerned, I think that there could be many people who could be on the same page for many arguments as far as the religion is concerned. Maybe you can just go and read. There are lots of details, and you can see which are the points that he actually goes and say that how the religions has created problem. Now, this is, of course, he says that imagine a world with no religion. There would be no suicide bombers, no honor killings, no 9/11, no Indian partition, no Israeli or Palestinian wars, no Serb, Croat, or Muslim massacres, no persecutions of Jews as a Christ killers, no Northern Ireland troubles, no Taliban to blow up ancient statues, no public beheadings of blasphemers, and no flogging of female skin for the crime of showing an inch of it. So, if there was no religion in the world, perhaps the world would have been a better place to live in. So next argument that he says that we find is that everybody says that you have to have religion to be good, because if there is no religion, the people would not be ethical, people would not be good, people would not be doing good what they are supposed to do. So there he comes with, goes on to argue that, well, this is not a right belief. What he has to say: what are the roots of mortality? Why are we good? There are food. Once again, he goes back to Darwinian theory, and he says it can be very easily explained. I will just take the 4 points that he has taken here, but I would definitely suggest you to read. There are several pages which he has given, but the crux of this is these are four good reasons for individuals to be altruistic, generous, or moral towards each other. So there is nothing to do with God. If you want to be good, that's what he says. It's a Darwinian principle of the behavior that actually makes you moral or makes you altruistic. So there is a special case of genetic kinship. This actually comes in, if you read a selfish gene, you can understand that this is some kind of a genetic kinship which exists. That also is based on a Darwinian principle which make the person good. There is a reciprocation, the repayment of favors given, and the giving of favors in anticipation of payback. Now, this is what is happening, that sometimes if you, when you actually, praise somebody or help somebody, the person in turn helps you. And so your body, your mind, your entire psyche actually is tuned to know that, well, this is going to be useful and effective. And so Darwinian's selection theory comes here, and you become altruistic. There is a particular additional belief of conspicuous generosity as a way of buying authentic advertising. Because if you do this, you are being hailed in society as somebody is a good man, and you actually enjoy that. And because it has happened, and to some people, the Darwin's natural selection would let you know that, well, this is the way to go, and that's how you become altruistic. The Darwinian benefit of acquiring a reputation of generosity and kindness. That's exactly what I mentioned. So his point is that it is not the religion which is, because we of which we should be the God of for which we should be good, but it is basically the Darwinian principle, your genetic kinship, which decides whether you are going to be altruistic or not. And so he actually uh, it comes a question that if there is no God, why be good? He gives an example. And there was a time, this is a real story, that once the Montreal police was on a strike for almost, I think, 12 hours. So by the end of the day, what happened? The six banks had been robbed, 100 shops had been looted, 12 fires had been set, 40 carloads of storefront glasses had been broken, and $3 million in property damage had been inflicted. So now his question is, majority of the population of Montreal presumably believed in God. So why didn't the fear of God restrain them? So for by this time, by argument, you find many people who are, corrupt, who are actually jealous, those who are doing all the time doing bad to others. Does this mean that all these people are atheists? No. In fact, people who also believe in God also behave in a not the way, the human way they should be behaving. So the argument that because there is a God, you become good is not that easily acceptable to Richard. So he goes on to ask that wasn't the Montreal strike a pretty good natural experiment to test the hypothesis that belief in God makes us good? The religion and hostile humans. This is another thing which he comes up. The Dr. Yunus Sheikh, a medical doctor and a lecturer, was sentenced to death for blasphemy. His particular crime was to tell students that the Prophet Muhammad was not a Muslim before he invented the religion at the age of 40. A big crime, and that's why actually he was killed. He was sentenced to death. In 2006, in Afghanistan, Abdul Rahman was sentenced to death for converting to Christianity. And in 1922, in Britain, John William Galt was sentenced to 9 months hard labor for blasphemy because he compared Jesus to a clown. Now, why this argument? Let's go further. All human embryos. Now he talks about why the all religion are against abortion, and the reason, the argument which is given is that all human embryos are examples of human life. Thereby, an absolute religious light, abortion is simply wrong because it is a full-fledged murder. Embryo is alive. It's alive. It's a live human being. How can you kill? Now he is not in favor of abortion, but what his argument is that you can't kill an embryo because it is live human, but you can easily kill full-fledged humans just because you think that what their behavior was wrong. So what kind of religion that we are talking about? Most plausible as a motive for war is an unshakable faith that one's own religion is the only true one, reinforced by the holy book that explicitly condemns all heretics and followers of rivals religions to the death, and explicitly promises that the soldiers of God will go straight to the martyr's heaven. And I think all of us know that this is what the Islam is known for, that they actually, there are certain examples that Richard has given, that there was a bombing in London, and those people who were Muslim, they were asked that, why did you do this? You weren't you all these innocent people? They said that we have no revenge against anybody, but we had to do this because we were told by our faith in Islam, that if we do this, then only we will go to heaven. So this is what is actually happening in the things. And then he also goes on to talk about the holy book versus science book. Part of it I already told what he said it before. Now, fundamentalists would know they are right because they have read the truth in a holy book, and they know in advance that nothing will budge from their belief. In truth, holy book is an axiom. Actually, it is an axiom. That's what he says, and not the end product of a process of reasoning. The book is true, and if the evidence seems to contradict it, the evidence that must be thrown out and not the book. You just can't, challenge what is written in the book. It's that's what is happening, and that's what is frustrating to him. Books about evolution are believed not because they are holy. They are believed because they present overwhelming quantities of mutually buttressed evidence. In principle, any reader can go and check that evidence. When a science book is wrong, somebody eventually discovers the mistake and it is corrected in subsequent books. That conspicuously doesn't not happen with the holy books. So he says that, holy books versus science books, there's hardly any comparison, because science book is based on evidence and holy books is just on a belief, and nobody wants to change it. This is one very sensitive chapter that he has written about children, faith, and religion. He has come up with a very strong views. Uh, he says that this is, of course, he starts with quoting Victor Hugo, that there is in every village a torch, the teacher, but there is an extinguisher, the clergyman. What is really pernicious is the practice of teaching children that faith itself is a virtue. Faith is an evil precisely because it requires no justification and brooks no argument. So he says not faith is not the thing. Such teaching primes them to grow up into potentially lethal weapons for future jihads. Isn't it always a form of child abuse to label children as possessors of belief that they are too young to have thought about? Yet the practice persists to this day, almost entirely unquestioned. And to question this is my purpose, Richard says. And parents, now he's talking about parents. Parents correspondingly have no God given license to enculturate their children in whatever ways they personally choose. No right to limit the horizons of their children's knowledge, to bring them up in an atmosphere of dogma and superstition, or to insist that they follow the straight and narrow paths of their own faith. This, he says, is absolutely wrong. And our society has accepted the preposterous idea that it is normal and right to indoctrinate tiny children in the religion of their parents and to slap religious labels on them: Catholic child, Protestant child, Jewish child, Muslim child, and so on. Although no other comparable labels, no conservative children, no liberal children. Please, please, please raise your consciousness about this. And this is his one of the central argument. So if you look at what actually is talking about, is that these are the posers that Richard has put. Why is God considered an explanation for anything? It is not. It is a failure to explain. A shrug of the shoulders, I don't know, dressed up in a spirituality and ritual. If someone credits something to God, generally what it means is that they haven't a clue. So they are attributing it to an unreachable, unknowable sky fairy. Ask for an explanation of where God came from, and odds are you will get a vague, pseudo philosophical reply about having always existed or being outside the nature, which explains nothing. Even if it were true that we need God to be moral, it would, of course, not make God's existence likely. merely it makes God desirable. As a scientist, I am hostile to fundamentalist religion because it actively debunches the scientific enterprise. It teaches us not to change our mind and not to want to know exciting things that are available to be known. It subverts science and saps the intellect. And he ends with these lines that I'm thrilled to be alive at a time when humanity is pushing against the limits of understanding. Even better, we may eventually discover that there are no limits. And this is the what he has to say. So here the book ends, and I would now tell you about what I feel my take on this book. Now, if you see this book, these are the points which I would say that should be appreciated. The book has posed some probing questions about religion and God's existence. The book is not just for the atheist, but for every human being who wants to explore the origin of our existence. Though not convincing every time, Dawkins has tried very hard to justify his opinion, citing several examples, stories, scientific data, genetics, and evolution biology. For the effort that he has put on to is something which is really appreciable. And for his efforts to send everyone in a search mode to find answers to his question, I'm sure he should be commended. Reading this book has been like a roller coaster ride for me. You would pass through all kinds of emotions: anger, amazement, disgust, disappointment, and at some time, maybe partly belief also. As a curious reader who respects every opinion, this book would surely make you read other books if you believe in God, to explore the armamentarium to counter Dawkins' all-out attacks, and which really happened with me. I'm being very honest that although there were lots of questions deep down, I still was not very much convinced, and because of this, I read 3 4 books more to see how best I can really come up with an answer to his questions. And so for that reason, at least I should thank him that he make me read many other things. So these are my takes about what are the good things. But then, if I have to say where this book actually fails, or I would say has disappointed, or I would say is not very convincing. The biggest drawback is Dawkins' very sparse mention of Hinduism. His anger is against Abrahamic religions without adequate knowledge of Hinduism, Buddhism, or Jainism. His generalization is very hard to accept. In fact, this aspect makes this book a half-cooked book because you just can't isolate one particular area, big area of religion which is practiced by people and make a generalization about the whole world. While Richard tries to explain everything which is so complex and beautiful in this world through Darwin's natural selection, the arguments are not penetrating and convincing. In fact, his language at times is offending. And here I want you to go back to where I said that, he in his own words, he says that, the Darwin's natural selection theory started after something came up. And then the selection started. So what was that something which came up? No explanation for that. How did universe begin? Now he misses a very big point here. Darwin's natural selection did not begin the universe. Theory did not take us from nothing to something. It came into play afterwards. That's what I was saying before. So the question is that who created universe still remains unanswered by even scientists and evolution biologists. He sounds arrogant and pretentious at times while putting forth his argument. For example, he says if science cannot find out the ultimate truth, what makes anyone think that a religion can? So I think without, at times his language, although he says, I don't attack religion, I don't attack God, but it does. That's the question. That's the point. Uh, and then universe is the answer. So what is the question? That's the point. And well, I was thinking that because Hinduism wasn't there, and I wonder whether Hinduism, if he had read properly, understood properly, whether this book would have been a little different. But that's a point of conjecture. But I have to answer Robert Richard Dawkins, and before that, is one thing is about Hinduism. Let's go to the Hinduism. Yeah, 4 things. All of us, of course, Hinduism is not something which I would claim to understand fully because it's such a vast subject, difficult subject. But whatever I could gather, I think 4 things is a Tattvamasi, that is that I am. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahmin. Sat Chit Anand. Sat is a truth, Chit is a consciousness, and Anand is a bliss. And Chidananda Rupam Sivoham Sivoham. Now, all four things, if you see Hinduism, Hinduism has never said believed in a God, so as to say. If you look at all our Vedanta or Adi Sankaracharya ji, what is said that the God is within. It's never that there is something called a physical God. And I read somewhere which is so beautiful that at all other religions look up for God, and the Hindu religions or Hindus they look within for God, because we know that is the Sanatan Dharma, the Brahmin. Ultimate person is a Brahmin. And the Hindu word is also not ours. If you see Vedanta, nowhere the word Hinduism is kept written. It's always was so Sanatan Dharma. The Hindu word was given or coined by the Britishers. So, if you have to go back to our origins, our roots, what exactly is told is that it is, you don't have to go out and think that how the universe came, where is the God, is right within, because the energy is right within. And if I have to answer him with only one particular verse, then it would be this: Purnamada Purnamidam Purnata Purnamudachyate Purnasa Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. What it means is that Purnamada, which is outside, is a Purna. There's a divine consciousness. What is within me is also divine consciousness. And what is manifest consciousness outside is nothing but it has come from the within. So if you take Purna from Purna, ultimately Purna stays. That means anything which is taken from outside, inside consciousness is eternal and it will always stay. So there is nothing like beginning, there is nothing like end. So this is the answer. If somebody understands this, then I think that his perspective hopefully might change. And by I will end this by saying that he writes in the beginning that I'm sure that anybody who would read this book would turn atheist. My answer is that, well, I have not turned atheist. In fact, I have to be thankful to him to make me read, make me believe more in my Hinduism. And when you say Purnamadaha and Purnamidam, that is the ultimate reality that one can think of, which is so profound right here at our doorsteps. Thank you very much for your listening.